Love was never supposed to feel like this. They say love is warm, gentle, and easy. The kind that people celebrate openly under bright lights and smiling faces. The kind that families bless and the world accepts without question. But some love stories are born in silence. Some begin with stolen glances across crowded rooms, with conversations whispered when no one is listening, with hearts racing not from excitement, but from fear of being discovered. Amara Valen grew up in a world where every step of her life had already been planned. The perfect daughter, the perfect future, the perfect marriage to a man chosen by her family. Everything was already written, until the day she met Liora Bennett. Liora was the kind of person who walked through life like she belonged, nowhere and everywhere at the same time. Free, fearless, and painfully honest. The kind of person Amara had never allowed herself to become. Their first meeting meant nothing. Just two strangers passing in the same moment. But sometimes fate has a quiet way of changing everything. A look that lasted a second too long. A smile that lingered a little too deeply. A feeling neither of them was supposed to have. Because the truth was simple. Amara Valen was never supposed to fall in love with Liora Bennett. And yet, from the very first moment their worlds collided, something in their hearts already knew. This love would never be easy. But it would be impossible to forget. The grand hall of the Valen estate was filled with music, laughter, and the soft clinking of glasses. Crystal chandeliers glowed above the guests dressed in expensive gowns and tailored suits. It was another perfect evening for the Valen family. At least, that was how it looked. Standing near the tall balcony doors, Amara Valen held a glass of champagne she barely touched. Her dark eyes wandered across the room, watching people smile and talk as if everything in the world was simple. But for her, nothing felt simple. "Amara, smile," her mother whispered sharply beside her. "People are looking." Of course they were. They always were. Amara forced a polite smile, the kind she had practiced her entire life, the kind expected from the daughter of one of the most powerful families in the city. Across the room stood Daniel Carter, the man her family had chosen for her. He was handsome, rich, and perfectly acceptable in every way. And yet, when Amara looked at him, she felt absolutely nothing. The music changed, and the doors of the hall opened as more guests arrived. Among them was someone Amara had never seen before. A girl in a simple black dress stepped inside, clearly out of place among the glittering crowd. Her hair fell loosely around her shoulders, and her eyes moved around the room with quiet curiosity instead of nervousness. She looked free. Amara didn't know why, but she couldn't stop staring. At that exact moment, the girl looked up. Their eyes met. For a second, everything around them faded into silence. The girl tilted her head slightly, almost amused by Amara's intense stare. Then she smiled, not the polite, fake smile everyone else wore tonight, a real one. And somehow, that simple moment made Amara's heart beat faster than it ever had before. She quickly looked away, confused by the strange feeling rising in her chest. She didn't even know the girl's name, but something told her that meeting her tonight was not an accident, and that her perfectly planned life had just begun to change. The party continued, but Amara's attention kept drifting back to the mysterious girl. She spotted her near one of the long tables, casually sipping from a glass while watching the elegant crowd with quiet amusement. Unlike everyone else, she didn't seem impressed by the wealth or the luxury surrounding her. If anything, she looked slightly bored. Amara took a slow breath before finally walking toward her. Each step felt strangely heavy, like she was walking toward something unknown. When she reached the table, the girl noticed her immediately. "So, the girl said softly, her voice calm and teasing. Are you going to keep staring at me all night, or were you planning to say hello? Amara blinked, caught off guard. I wasn't staring, she replied quickly. The girl raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. Sure. For a moment, they just stood there looking at each other. Up close, Amara noticed how warm the girl's eyes were. Not cold like the people she usually met at events like this. I'm Liora, the girl said finally, offering a small smile. Amara. Leora's expression shifted slightly in recognition. Amara Valen, she said. So this is your party. Our party, Amara corrected softly. My mother organized it. Liora glanced around the hall again. Looks exhausting. That made Amara laugh before she could stop herself. It was a quiet, genuine laugh, something she rarely allowed in public, Liora noticed, and she smiled again. But just as the moment began to feel comfortable, a familiar voice interrupted. Amara. Daniel Carter stepped beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. There you are, he said warmly. Amara felt her body tense slightly. Leora's eyes moved between them, quickly understanding the situation. Your boyfriend? She asked casually. Amara hesitated. Daniel answered for her. Her fiancé. Something flickered across Leora's face for just a moment. Surprise. Then she looked back at Amara with a quiet, unreadable expression. Well, Liora said, placing her glass down on the table. It was nice meeting you, Amara. And just like that, she walked away. But as she disappeared into the crowd, Amara couldn't shake the strange feeling in her chest. Because for the first time in her life, the future her family had chosen for her suddenly didn't feel right anymore. For the rest of the night, Amara couldn't stop thinking about Liora. Even while guests continued to congratulate her and Daniel about their upcoming marriage, her mind kept drifting back to the girl who had walked away so easily. There was something different about her. Something real. The party finally ended past midnight. One by one, the guests left the mansion, their cars disappearing through the long driveway gates. Amara stepped outside onto the quiet garden balcony, needing air after hours of pretending. The night was calm. The city lights shimmered in the distance while the wind gently moved through the trees. She closed her eyes for a moment. You look like someone who survived a very long performance. Amara's eyes opened immediately. Leaning against the stone railing a few steps away was Liora. Amara's heart skipped. I thought you left, she said quietly. Liora shrugged slightly. I tried. She looked up at the night sky before speaking again. But I realized I didn't want to leave without saying goodbye. Amara walked closer, stopping beside her at the railing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt strangely comfortable. You don't seem happy, Liora said softly. Amara looked down at her hands. I'm supposed to be. That's not the same thing. Amara let out a quiet breath. Sometimes, she admitted, it feels like my life already belongs to everyone else. Liora studied her for a moment. Then she said something that surprised Amara. You know, you could run away. Amara laughed softly, shaking her head. It's not that simple. Maybe not, Liora replied. But sometimes the hardest prisons are the ones we never try to escape. Their eyes met again. This time, neither of them looked away. For a moment, it felt like the world had gone completely still. but footsteps approaching from inside the house broke the moment. Liora stepped back. "I should go," she said gently. Before Amara could respond, Liora turned and walked toward the garden gate. But just before leaving, she glanced back. And for the first time that night, Amara wished she had the courage to follow her. Days passed, but Liora Bennett refused to leave Amara's mind. Amara tried to return to her normal routine meetings with her mother, wedding preparations, public appearances with Daniel. Everything continued exactly as planned. Yet something inside her had already changed. One afternoon, needing space from the suffocating mansion, Amara decided to walk through the city alone. It was something she rarely did. The streets were alive with noise and people moving in every direction. For the first time in a long while, Amara felt invisible, free. She stopped at a small cafe on a quiet corner, planning to stay only for a few minutes. But the moment she stepped inside, a familiar voice froze her in place. "Well, this is unexpected." Amara slowly looked up. Behind the cafe counter stood Liora, wearing a simple apron, her sleeves rolled up as she held a cup of coffee in one hand. Amara blinked in surprise. "You work here?" Liora smiled. "Most days." Amara laughed softly, still trying to process the coincidence. Of all the places, Liora placed the coffee cup on the counter. "So," she said playfully, "is the rich girl brave enough to sit in a normal cafe?" Amara raised an eyebrow. "Are you challenging me?" "Maybe." Without another word, Amara walked to the counter and sat down. "Then I'll take a coffee," she said. Liora leaned closer slightly. "Careful," she whispered. "Spending time with me might ruin your perfect life." Amara met her gaze. For the first time since they met, she didn't hesitate. "Maybe," Amara said quietly. "That wouldn't be such a bad thing." Leora's teasing smile slowly faded into something softer, something more dangerous, because deep down, both of them were beginning to realize the same thing. What they were starting to feel was the kind of love the world would never allow. After that day, Amara began visiting the cafe more often. At first, she told herself it was just for the quiet atmosphere, a place where no one treated her like a symbol of her family's reputation. But deep down she knew the truth. She was coming back for Liora. Every afternoon, Amara would sit at the same small table near the window while Liora worked behind the counter. Sometimes they talked for hours. Sometimes they simply exchanged glances and small smiles between customers. With Liora, everything felt easy. One rainy evening, the cafe was nearly empty. Only the soft sound of rain tapping against the glass windows filled the room. Amara sat at the counter while Liora cleaned a few cups. "You're becoming a regular customer?" Liora teased without looking up. Amara shrugged slightly. "Your coffee is good." Liora laughed softly. "That's a lie." Amara smiled. "Maybe I just like the company." Liora paused for a moment before placing the cup down. She leaned against the counter, facing Amara. "You know this is dangerous, right?" Amara's smile slowly faded. "Talking to you?" "Being here," Liora replied quietly. "With me." Amara looked into her eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Amara asked softly, "Why does it feel like I've known you for years?" Liora's expression softened. "Maybe because," she said slowly, You're finally being yourself." The air between them suddenly felt heavier. More personal, more real. Amara's hand rested on the counter, only inches away from Leora's. For a second it seemed like Liora might reach for it, but the cafe door suddenly opened. The moment broke instantly. Amara quickly pulled her hand away, and when she turned toward the door, her heart dropped. Standing there was Daniel. His eyes moved from Amara to Liora, then back to Amara. "So this is where you've been," he said calmly. But something in his voice felt cold. The tension inside the cafe became unbearable. Daniel stepped closer, his expression polite but suspicious. "Amara," he said, forcing a small smile. "Your mother has been trying to reach you." Amara stood up slowly. "I didn't see my phone." Daniel's eyes briefly glanced at Liora again. "And who is this?" Before Amara could answer, Liora spoke calmly. "Just the barista." Amara felt something twist painfully in her chest at those words. "Just the barista." Daniel nodded slightly. "Well," he said, turning back to Amara, "we should go. Your mother is waiting." Amara hesitated. For a moment, she looked back at Liora. Their eyes met, and in that silent moment, both of them understood something without needing words. This wasn't going to be simple. Amara finally turned and walked toward the door with Daniel. But just before leaving, she stopped. Without looking back, she spoke softly. "I'll see you tomorrow." It was meant for Liora. Daniel didn't say anything during the car ride, but the silence was heavy. When they finally stopped outside the Valen estate, Daniel spoke. "You like her?" Amara's heart froze. She looked at him, trying to stay calm. "She's just someone I met." Daniel studied her face carefully. Then he sighed. "Amara, I don't care if you're bored. I don't care if you want to rebel a little." His voice grew more serious. "But whatever this is," he looked directly into her eyes, "it needs to stop." Inside the cafe across the city, Liora stood by the window watching the rain fall. Her mind replayed the moment Daniel arrived, and the way Amara had looked at her before leaving. Liora closed her eyes, because she knew something now that terrified her. She was already falling in love, and loving Amara Valen could destroy both of their lives. The next day felt heavier than usual. Amara spent the entire morning pretending to listen to her mother talk about wedding plans. Flowers, venues, guests, everything was already being decided as if her future was simply another business arrangement. But her mind was somewhere else, at a small cafe across the city. By late afternoon, she couldn't take it anymore. Without telling anyone, Amara left the mansion and drove straight to the cafe. The bell above the door rang softly as she stepped inside. Liora was wiping down the counter when she looked up. For a moment, both of them just stared at each other. "You came back," Liora said quietly. Amara walked closer. "You thought I wouldn't?" Liora gave a small shrug. "Your fiancé didn't look like the kind of man who enjoys competition." Amara sighed. "It's not like that." Liora leaned back against the counter, studying her. "Then what is it like?" Amara hesitated. How could she explain a life that had never truly been her own? "My family has already decided everything for me," she said softly. "And what do you want?" The question felt simple, but it was the hardest thing Amara had ever been asked. Her eyes slowly met Leora's. "You." The word came out before she could stop it. Silence filled the cafe. Leora's breathing slowed slightly. like she was trying to process what she had just heard. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered. "Why?" "Because I might believe you." Amara stepped closer. "Maybe you should." For a moment, the distance between them felt impossibly small. Leora's hand moved slightly on the counter. Amara's fingers slowly brushed against it. Electric. Neither of them pulled away. Their eyes locked. And slowly, carefully, Leora leaned closer. Their faces were only inches apart, but just as their lips were about to touch, the cafe door suddenly opened. Both of them jumped apart instantly. A couple walked in, completely unaware they had just interrupted something dangerous. Leora looked away quickly, her heart racing. Amara exhaled slowly. Neither of them spoke about what almost happened, but both of them felt it. The line between friendship and something more had already been crossed. Days passed, but the tension between them only grew stronger. Every time Amara visited the cafe, the air between her and Leora felt heavier. Their conversations became softer, longer. Their glances lingered. And sometimes, their hands brushed for just a second too long. But outside the cafe, the world was starting to close in. One evening, Amara returned home to find her mother waiting in the living room. Victoria Valen rarely waited for anyone, which meant something was wrong. "Sit down," her mother said calmly. Amara obeyed. Victoria placed a photo on the table. Amara's heart stopped. It was a picture of her inside the cafe, and across from her, Leora. "I had someone follow you," her mother said coldly. Amara felt anger rise in her chest. "You spied on me?" "I protected you," Victoria corrected sharply. Her eyes hardened. "Who is she?" Amara didn't answer. The silence was enough. Victoria stood up slowly. "You will stop seeing that girl immediately." "No." The word escaped before Amara could think. Her mother stared at her in disbelief. "You're risking your future for a stranger?" "She's not a stranger." Victoria's voice turned icy. "You are engaged, Amara. You will marry Daniel Carter." "That is final." Amara's hands clenched. "For once in my life," she said quietly, "I want to choose something for myself." Victoria leaned closer, her voice dangerously calm. "If you continue seeing that girl, I will make sure she disappears from your life." The threat hung in the air, and for the first time, Amara truly understood how serious this had become. Across the city, Leora locked the cafe for the night. She stepped outside into the cool air. But the moment she turned the corner, a black car was parked near the street. A man stepped out. "Well," he said calmly. "Liora Bennett." Her heart dropped. "Mrs. Valen would like to have a word with you." And suddenly, this forbidden love had become far more dangerous than either of them expected. The car ride was silent. Leora sat in the back seat, staring out the window as the city lights passed by. Her heart pounded harder with every minute. She already knew who was behind this. When the car finally stopped in front of the Valen estate, her suspicions were confirmed. The large gates slowly opened. Moments later, she was escorted into the mansion. Victoria Valen was waiting in the living room. Elegant, calm, dangerous. "So," Victoria said, looking Leora up and down. "You're the girl." Leora stood straight, refusing to show fear. "If this is about Amara, you should talk to her." Victoria gave a cold smile. "Oh, I will." She stepped closer. "But first, I wanted to meet the person trying to ruin my daughter's future. Liora clenched her fists. I'm not ruining anything. Victoria laughed softly. You think this is a love story? Her voice grew colder. My daughter has a life waiting for her. A future, a reputation. She leaned closer. And you are a problem. Liora met her gaze. I never asked her to choose me. No, Victoria replied calmly. But she might. The room fell silent. Then Victoria spoke again. So I'm giving you a choice. Leora's chest tightened. You leave the city tonight, Victoria said. You disappear from Amara's life. Her eyes hardened. And in return, I let you keep your job, your life, and everything you currently have. A long silence followed. Liora thought about Amara. Her laugh, her quiet courage, the way her eyes softened whenever they looked at each other. Then Liora whispered the hardest words she had ever said. Okay. That same night, Amara rushed to the cafe. But when she arrived, the lights were off. The doors were locked. A small envelope was taped to the glass. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a short note. Amara, you deserve the life you were meant to have, and I would never forgive myself if I took that away from you. Some love stories aren't meant to stay, but that doesn't mean they weren't real. Thank you for finding me. Liora? Tears blurred Amara's vision. No, she whispered. But Liora was already gone. Days passed. The wedding preparations continued. Everything returned to normal, at least on the outside. On the day of the wedding, Amara stood in front of the mirror in her white dress. Everyone said she looked perfect, but inside she felt empty. When the ceremony began, she walked slowly down the aisle. Guests smiled. Music played. Daniel waited at the altar. Everything was exactly as planned. Then the priest spoke. If anyone objects to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace. Silence. Amara's hands trembled. Her heart raced. She suddenly remembered something Liora once said. Sometimes the hardest prisons are the ones we never try to escape. And in that moment, Amara finally understood. Before the priest could continue, she stepped back. I can't do this. Gasps filled the church. Victoria stood up immediately. Amara, I'm sorry, Amara said, her voice shaking. But for the first time in her life, she walked away, not toward the life chosen for her, but toward the unknown, toward freedom. 6 months later, the city looked different now. Or maybe Amara did. She had moved away from her family's estate and started living on her own. It wasn't easy, but for the first time in her life, every decision was hers. One quiet afternoon, she walked into a small cafe while traveling in another city. The bell above the door rang softly. Welcome. The voice stopped mid-sentence. Amara slowly looked up. Behind the counter stood Liora. For a moment, neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. 6 months of distance. 6 months of unanswered questions. Finally, Liora broke the silence. You ran away from your wedding. Amara smiled softly. News travels fast. Liora looked at her carefully. You shouldn't be here. Amara stepped closer. Why? Leora's voice was quieter now. Because if you're here, it means you chose me. Amara shook her head gently. No. Liora looked confused. I didn't run away for you. The words hung in the air. Then Amara smiled. I ran away from me." Leora's eyes softened, and slowly, she smiled back. "So," Liora asked quietly, "what happens now?" Amara looked around the cafe, then back at her. "For the first time in my life," she reached for Leora's hand, "we find out together. And this time, their love was no longer forbidden, because the only rule that mattered now was the one they chose for themselves. Some love stories begin with perfect timing. Others begin in chaos, fear, and impossible choices. Amara and Leora's story was never meant to be easy. Their love was tested by expectations, family, and the world that tried to decide their future for them. But sometimes love is not about fighting the world. Sometimes it's about finding the courage to choose your own life. And in the end, Amara didn't just choose Liora. She chose freedom. Because the most powerful love is the one that allows you to finally become who you truly are. Some love stories are forbidden, but the strongest ones refuse to disappear.